In May 2024, we decided to set out for our first ever multi-day bikepacking trip, riding around the entirety of Lake Ontario, beginning in Toronto, moving on to Kingston, crossing the border into upstate New York, then down to Syracuse where we would join the Erie Canal all the way over to Rochester and up to Niagara-on-the-Lake, back to Toronto. It would take us 13 days. Just about 2 hours in, on the edge of Scarborough, and the sun has come out enough to get the sunglasses on. Pathway closures and road closures were unfortunately all too common on the morning of our first day. Rerouting in the suburbs east of Toronto added about an hour or an hour and a half to an already long day. Stopped quickly at a park in Ajax to use the facilities. About 4 hours probably still to go because of all the detours and doubling back in Scarborough. We've got a weird mix of thunderstorm clouds on one side of us and blue sky on the other side, so it's tough to know exactly how to dress for the occasion. Clearing the suburbs east of Toronto was always going to make for a long day. Navigating the reroutes and doubling back added a couple of hours to our ride. By the time we got to Port Hope and our hotel, it was late, the sun was going down, and we were really dragging. Starting day 2 just before 9 a.m. in Port Hope, with a stop today in Colborne to get my bike looked at. The crank is wiggling a little bit, probably just needs a spacer, I hope, or maybe only just to be tightened up. On our way to Wellington and possibly Sandbank Provincial Park.
So pro tip, if Apple says drizzling rain ends at 9 a.m., what they really mean is the downpour begins at 9 a.m. and might end by lunch.
Century Cycle in Colborne tightened my crank, and we got lunch as we waited out the rain and dried off. After lunch, we were on the amazing Millennium Trail all the way to Wellington, where we made the decision to forgo the camping and head to a hotel in Picton. A wise decision. Just beginning day 3, getting a late start, almost 11 o'clock. Had to take the bike in to get it looked at and buy some new parts. In Glenora, we beat a ferry closure and were able to hop on the boat and head across to Adolphustown, which would lead to the highway into Kingston. Headwind through Adolphustown on the way to Kingston. First real headwind of the trip. While riding Highway 33, we ran into a number of cycle tourists who shared stories with us, including a German gentleman riding from Buffalo to Quebec City on a recumbent bicycle that was fully loaded. Day 4, leaving Queen's University in Kingston for some more busy road riding through bike-unfriendly Kingston. The highway east of Kingston was poorly maintained, with some aggressive drivers heading towards QEW. The situation improves immensely at Gananoque, where a bike path leads all the way to the Thousand Island Bridges. Unbeknownst to us, the bridge would become our first major obstacle. Construction on the sidewalk meant that we couldn't walk across the bridge as we intended to. Thankfully, the construction company took pity on us and scrambled a pickup truck to drive us across the bridge and deposit us on the island. They even went so far as to contact their partners at the American Bridge and alert them that we would need a ride on that side as well. We made it to Cedar Point State Park, our campsite for the night, where we enjoyed a brief dip in the river and a beautiful sunset. We were dragging ourselves on day 5 due to lack of sleep, Cedar Point was a lovely campground, but there were a ton of Canadian geese in the area, none of whom ever stopped honking the entirety of the night. We stopped for lunch in Sackett's Harbor and then continued to ride all afternoon through the farming communities of Upper New York State. Some late afternoon headwinds out of the south, combined with the weekend traffic full of trucks pulling RVs and boats, made us really pleased to finally arrive at our campground at Selkirk Shores State Park. Morning of day 6, heading down towards Syracuse today on US 11. Fairly busy side highway. You can hear the interstate behind me to my left, but it's only about a mile away. But people on this road also seem to be ripping along, probably in their hurry to get over to the interstate where they can go even faster. Halfway to Syracuse on day 6, started raining on us for about an hour, so have pulled into a cafe in Brewerton, New York.
Town of Sylvan! Woo! And this is our first time on the Erie Canal Rail Trails. I can't wait.
Just at the end of the day here in Fayetteville, New York, we're riding through Green Lakes, I think it's called, State Park. Beautiful park, but there is a hill in here, climbing out of a ravine basically, and my Garmin says that we just passed a 9% climb, and it's showing it going red in another couple of minutes, which I assume is going to be probably 15 or 16% coming up. So not the best way to end the day. We spent our rest day with Rebecca's friend Peggy, who teaches at the University of Syracuse and who kindly toured us around the campus and the town. We made a quick stop to the Irish district to see the only stoplight in the United States that has green on the top. Back on the road after a day off in Fayetteville, New York, just outside of Syracuse. We're just riding through the city of Syracuse now during morning rush hour with a lot of traffic. And in the background here, that is the boyhood home of President Grover Cleveland. The start of our second week offered a huge difference from the start of our first. The Erie Canal was a pure joy to read. We were finally free of traffic, and the crushed gravel and dirt paths were shady and cool and easy to ride. After vowing no more long days, we abandoned that pledge when we realized we would have to camp beside the canal. Instead, we added 30 kilometers to our day to take us to a Best Western in Palmyra. We're here on the corner of Church Street in downtown Palmyra. Not quite sure how this got its name. There's a church here on the corner. There's a church here on the corner. There's a church here on the corner. And there is a church here on the corner. Apparently, this is one of only 10 such places in the world and the only one in the United States. Because we had pushed to the Mormon pilgrimage site in Palmyra on Monday, it meant that our Tuesday was much reduced in terms of distance, our shortest day of the trip. We had an easy ride that day along the Erie Canal, veering off that to head north into downtown Rochester, past the university and towards a Hyatt in Midtown. We headed to the George Eastman House and Museum, a beautiful spot that included a surprising statue for the actor Philip Seymour Hoffman. Complete blue sky day to start off Wednesday, leaving Rochester. Very crazy departure through the west end of the city where tons of traffic, bike lanes disappearing, reappearing, lots of broken glass, not well maintained at all. Might have even made more sense to double back to the canal through the south end of the city, given how scary parts of it were. But we're back on the path, expecting a thunderstorm today, but as you can see in the sky behind me, no sign of it right now.
Just riding to beat the rain.
Despite all the blue skies around us, my Garmin kept lighting up with squall warnings, wind warnings, and rain warnings. When the storm finally hit us with full force, we hid out for about an hour under a bridge eating trail mix and wondering what we were going to do for the rest of the day. We had booked a campsite that night at a place called Becker Farms, but we worried that the field would be wet and muddy. When we got there, we rebooked into a cabin. Got anything to say?
Let me think, hold on. Well, last day in the United States, we crossed the border, hopefully. And man, there's no choice but to make it now. We did it! Almost.
In Lockport, our time on the Erie Canal came to an end. We rode up a little hill to the Lock Museum, and that was it. The canal continued without us on to Buffalo. Border crossings continued to bedevil us. This time we took the wrong turn on a cloverleaf and ended up on a busy highway. We had to literally carry our bikes over a fence and double back to try the border a second time. Back in Canada, we were thrilled to be riding through beautiful Niagara-on-the-Lake, where we would spend the night with Kate and Victor, Rebecca's sister and brother-in-law.
Woohoo! The most stressful day yet! Really? Here he comes! Here he comes! Da-dum, da-dum!
A lazy morning as we rode from Niagara-on-the-Lake to Burlington, where I grew up and my parents still live.
Not doing that.
We weren't looking forward to this day, which would take us along North Service Road parallel to the QEW highway. It was fascinating to see the differences between municipalities across southwestern Ontario where it came to bike infrastructure. Niagara-on-the-Lake was weak, Grimsby was better, Stony Creek was terrible, but Hamilton, with its beachfront trail into Burlington, was wonderful. And just like that, it was our final day. 1,000 kilometers at Burl Oak Waterfront Park.
Woohoo!
Also, Burlington completely sucks. The bike lane is literally just paint on a very narrow lane with absolutely no shoulder. None.
This is pretty miserable.
Unfortunately, we were given extremely bad weather forecast by Apple, who suggested that we had a 4-hour window of no rain, which has turned into 2 hours of torrential rain with no real respite anywhere. I wouldn't be normally riding on a day like this because it seems supremely unsafe, but it's what we've got. After finally getting my brake pads replaced at Gears Import Credit, we were ready to tackle Bloor Street, the final stage of our 13-day journey.
It was a really rough last day, but we did it. Triumphant.
2 hours after finishing, I've packed up the luggage and the bikes, and it is an absolutely perfect, beautiful day for a bike ride.